My stepsister removed every photo of my dead mother and me from my father's house. She didn't throw them away all at once. She erased us slowly, quietly, frame by frame, until one day, it felt like we never existed at all. My father remarried when I was 19 years old. By that time, I was already living on my own, trying to figure out adulthood while still grieving my mom. She had been gone for 6 years, and although life had moved forward on paper, emotionally we were still standing in the same place she left us. When Dad told me he'd met someone new, I was genuinely happy for him. Loneliness had weighed on him for years, and I didn't want my grief to become a prison for his happiness. Gloria seemed kind when I met her, soft-spoken and polite, the type of woman who avoided conflict rather than created it. She had a daughter named Waverly, only 2 years younger than me, and I told myself that blending families was never easy, especially when everyone involved was already grown. I promised myself I would be patient, understanding, and mature about it. Waverly made no such effort. From the very first family dinner, she treated me like an outsider who just happened to know her new stepfather longer than she did. She talked over me constantly, corrected small details of stories I told about my own childhood, and made a point of emphasizing how happy she was to finally have a real father figure in her life. She said it casually, but always loud enough for me to hear. The way she said it made it clear she wasn't just sharing her feelings. She was staking a claim. My dad never noticed. Or maybe he noticed and didn't know what to do. Either way, I stayed quiet. I didn't live there anymore, and I convinced myself that a few awkward dinners every month were a small price to pay for my father's happiness. At first, I thought the tension was all in my head. Then I noticed the hallway. That hallway used to be a timeline of my life. School photos lined the wall in neat frames year after year. Awkward smiles, missing teeth, braces, graduation day. My mom had insisted on framing every single one. She used to joke that one day I'd thank her for documenting everything so carefully. On one visit, I stopped in front of the hallway and realized 2 frames were missing. The empty spaces were subtle enough that you might not notice unless you were looking for them, but I noticed immediately. My stomach dropped. I asked my dad about it, trying to sound casual, and he looked genuinely confused. He said Gloria must have moved them while redecorating and told me not to worry about it. That explanation should have reassured me. Instead, it made me uneasy. Later that night, I went into the garage looking for something and found a cardboard box tucked behind old tools and holiday decorations. Inside were my school photos, stacked together without frames, corners bent, like they were no longer important enough to display. I stood there longer than I want to admit, holding those pictures and trying to convince myself this wasn't intentional. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. I put the photos back on the wall myself before I left, thinking that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The next time I visited, more photos were gone. Not just school pictures this time, but my graduation photo and 2 framed pictures of my mom. I found them in the same box in the garage, like they'd never been put back at all. My chest felt tight as I realized this wasn't accidental anymore. I confronted my dad directly. He said he'd talked to Gloria. He said he didn't know what was happening. He said not to worry. I wanted to believe him, because believing him was easier than accepting the alternative. But every visit after that confirmed what I was afraid of. More photos disappeared each time. Pictures of fishing trips with my dad, camping trips we took every summer, birthday parties my mom planned down to the smallest detail, my first day of school, my 5th birthday. One by one, my childhood vanished from the walls of the house I grew up in. At the same time, new photos started appearing. Waverly's senior portraits replaced mine in the hallway. Her college acceptance photo took the spot on the mantel where my graduation picture used to be. Frames that once held images of my mother now displayed Waverly smiling at the camera. The house wasn't being redecorated. It was being rewritten. It didn't take long for me to understand what was happening. Gloria was too gentle to do something this calculated, and my dad was too distracted and conflict-averse to notice the changes happening slowly over time. Waverly, on the other hand, was methodical. She wasn't throwing things away in a burst of anger. She was erasing me carefully, making sure each removal was small enough to be dismissed, each change subtle enough that no one would question it. By the time anyone noticed, there would be nothing left to argue about. When I finally confronted her, she didn't deny it. She said the house felt cluttered with old photos everywhere. She said it was uncomfortable for her mother to live surrounded by pictures of my dad's dead wife. She said I didn't live there anymore, so why did I need space on the walls? Then she shrugged and told me the photos were somewhere in the garage, and that I could take them if I wanted, because nobody else needed them. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about pictures. This was about whether I still had a place in my father's life, or whether I was being quietly pushed into the past so someone else could take my spot. I didn't lose my place in my father's house all at once. I lost it because every time I asked him to protect me, he chose silence instead. And silence can erase you faster than cruelty ever could. After I realized the photos weren't disappearing by accident, something inside me stayed permanently tense whenever I visited my dad's house. Every step through the front door came with a quiet fear that something else would be missing. I'd catch myself scanning the walls before even saying hello, my eyes moving instinctively to the places where my memories used to live. The hallway, the mantel, the bookshelf near the window. I hated that I'd started doing that. It felt paranoid. It felt dramatic. But every single time, the fear was justified. Another frame gone. Another empty space filled with someone else's face. And every time, I felt that same hollow drop in my stomach, like I was watching pieces of my life get removed while I stood there pretending not to notice. I tried to handle it like an adult. I talked to my dad calmly. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I explained what I was finding in the garage, how the same box kept filling up with pieces of my childhood, how photos of my mom were being treated like clutter instead of memories. He listened, nodded, looked uncomfortable, and promised he'd talk to Gloria. That phrase started to mean nothing to me. I'll talk to her. Nothing ever changed after those conversations. If anything, the removals became more confident, more obvious, like whoever was doing it knew there would be no consequences. The worst part wasn't losing the photos. It was watching my father slowly detach from the reality of what was happening. He stopped noticing the walls. He stopped commenting on changes. When I pointed out missing pictures, he'd sigh like I was bringing up something inconvenient. He told me he didn't want to create tension in the house. He said everyone was still adjusting. He said we needed to move forward and stop living in the past. Hearing him call my childhood and my mother the past felt like being quietly disowned. It told me everything I needed to know about where I stood. My pain was an inconvenience. My memories were negotiable. His comfort mattered more than my place in his life. Meanwhile, Waverly grew more confident. She spoke about the house like it had always been hers. She talked about our family while looking directly at me, like I was included only out of politeness. She told stories about my dad as if she'd known him her whole life, correcting me when I added details from my own memories. She laughed easily. She relaxed. She didn't act like someone who was afraid of getting caught, because she wasn't. She knew my dad wouldn't stop her. She knew he'd rather avoid conflict than defend me. That knowledge gave her power, and she used it quietly, efficiently. The moment that finally broke me came on a Sunday afternoon that was supposed to be normal. We were sitting in the living room after dinner. Gloria was in the kitchen cleaning up. My dad had the TV on, barely paying attention. I looked up at the mantel without thinking, and realized my graduation photo was gone. That picture had been there for years. My mom had cried when it was taken. She'd insisted it go front and center. In its place was a framed photo of Waverly celebrating her college acceptance. Everyone else in the room acted like this was completely natural, like nothing had been replaced at all. I asked about it. The room went slightly quiet. My dad hesitated before answering. He said maybe it was time to rotate photos. He said there were only so many places to display things. He said I was being too sensitive about old pictures. That was the first time he said it out loud. Too sensitive. That phrase landed harder than anything Waverly had ever done. Because it didn't come from her. It came from him. That night, I went into the garage and looked through the box again. It was heavier than before. More frames, more memories. Photos of my mom stacked at the bottom like they mattered the least. I remember sitting on the concrete floor, surrounded by dust and spiderwebs, holding a picture of her and realizing something terrifying. If I left these photos here, they would disappear completely. Not all at once, not dramatically, just slowly enough that no one would notice. Just slowly enough that one day I'd walk into that house and there would be nothing left of me at all. That was the night I decided to stop waiting for my dad to protect me. I didn't announce it. I didn't make a scene. The next Sunday, while everyone was busy eating dessert and laughing in the dining room, I quietly carried every single box of photos out to my car. Frame by frame, memory by memory. No one stopped me. No one noticed until Waverly went to the garage and realized the boxes were gone. She stormed back inside, demanding to know where everything went. I told her calmly that I took the photos she said nobody needed. The look on her face was pure rage, but she had no argument. She'd already told me they didn't belong there. My dad didn't yell. He didn't ask me to bring them back. He looked relieved. That hurt more than anything else. After that, I pulled away. I stopped answering his calls. I stopped coming to dinner. Every excuse I gave felt like building a wall between me and the version of him who chose comfort over me. His messages shifted from casual to confused, then to worried. He asked if everything was okay. He asked if he'd done something wrong. Hearing that almost made me laugh, because the answer was obvious and painful at the same time. He had done something wrong. He had done nothing at all. At work, I couldn't focus. Simple tasks felt impossible. I caught myself staring at my screen without absorbing anything. That's when someone finally noticed. My friend Lana pulled me aside during lunch and asked what was going on. When I told her everything, she got angry in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be. She said it was cruel. She said my dad should be ashamed. She said I wasn't overreacting. Hearing someone else say what I'd been swallowing for months made something loosen in my chest. And that was when I realized something important. I wasn't just grieving my mother anymore. I was grieving the father I thought I had, the one who would always choose me. Pulling away from my dad didn't feel powerful the way people sometimes imagine cutting someone off does. It felt empty. Every ignored call came with guilt attached to it. Every unread message sat heavy in my chest. But answering him meant walking back into a situation where I felt invisible. And I wasn't ready to do that anymore. At first, I told myself I just needed space, a little distance to breathe and figure out how I felt, without constantly reopening the wound. But as days turned into weeks, the silence between us started to feel like something else entirely. It stopped feeling temporary and started feeling permanent, and that scared me more than I wanted to admit. My dad kept calling. His voicemails changed over time. The first ones were casual, like nothing was wrong. He asked how work was going. He mentioned the weather. He said he hoped I was doing okay. Then they became invitations. Dinner on Sunday. Gloria was making my favorite meal. He missed seeing me. When I didn't respond to those either, the tone shifted again. His voice sounded confused, then worried, like he couldn't understand how things had gotten this far without him noticing. In one message, he asked quietly if he'd done something wrong. I stood in my kitchen listening to that voicemail with my phone in my hand, feeling something twist painfully in my chest. He had done something wrong. He just didn't want to see it yet. Around that time, the cracks started showing in other parts of my life. At work, I made careless mistakes I'd never made before. I forgot meetings. I missed emails. I sat staring at my computer screen without actually processing what I was looking at. My friend Lana noticed first. During a lunch break, she asked me what was going on, and for once, I didn't try to brush it off. The words came out faster than I expected. I told her about the photos, about finding pieces of my childhood stacked in boxes like trash, about Waverly admitting she did it without shame, about my dad choosing peace over me. Lana got angry in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be. She said it was cruel. She said my dad should have protected me. She said I wasn't being dramatic or sensitive. Hearing someone else validate what I'd been feeling made me realize how much I'd been minimizing my own pain just to keep everyone else comfortable. A few days later, my dad showed up at my apartment unannounced. I almost didn't open the door. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home, to keep the distance intact, but when I looked through the peephole and saw how tired he looked, I couldn't bring myself to ignore him. He looked older than I remembered. His hair was messy. There were dark circles under his eyes. When I let him in, he didn't sit down right away. He stood in the middle of my living room, like he didn't know where he belonged. He asked why I'd been avoiding the family. That word, family, almost made me laugh. Instead, I told him the truth. I told him I couldn't keep coming over just to watch myself disappear from his life. I told him it hurt too much to sit in that house surrounded by reminders that someone else had replaced me without him stopping it. He tried to explain. He always did. He said Waverly was still adjusting. He said blending families was hard. He said he didn't want to create drama. I cut him off before he could finish. I told him she admitted everything to my face. I told him she threw away photos of my dead mother like they meant nothing. I told him that every time he stayed silent, it felt like he was choosing her comfort over my existence. My voice cracked when I said that, but I didn't cry. I wanted him to hear me clearly. He went quiet after that. Really quiet. He sat down on my couch and put his head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He apologized. He said he hadn't realized how much damage he was causing. He promised he would talk to Gloria and make sure things changed this time. I didn't feel relieved hearing that promise. I'd heard it before. I told him I needed to see action, not words. I told him I wasn't coming back to that house just to be hurt again. He nodded and said he understood. He hugged me before he left, the kind of hug he used to give me when I was a kid and scared of something I didn't know how to name yet. After he left, I stood alone in my living room feeling guilty and lighter at the same time. Guilty for hurting him. Lighter for finally saying what I'd been carrying for months. That night, I called Evangeline. She came over with wine and snacks and let me talk until my voice went hoarse. I told her everything. The photos, the confrontation, the fear that my dad was choosing his new family over me. She listened without interrupting, without trying to fix anything. Before she left, she suggested something I hadn't considered. Therapy. She said losing my mom and then feeling pushed out of my dad's life was complicated grief, the kind that didn't go away just because time passed. She gave me the name of a therapist she trusted. I saved it in my phone and stared at it for a long time before making the appointment. Walking into that first session felt terrifying. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't even know where to start. But once I began talking, I couldn't stop. I told the therapist about my mom, about the house, about the photos, about how hard I'd tried to be understanding so no one would think I was against my dad being happy. She listened carefully and then said something that stuck with me. Wanting your place in your family doesn't mean rejecting the new one. Protecting your mother's memory isn't the same as living in the past. She told me I had a right to exist in my father's life and home, and that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was necessary. A couple of weeks passed with no word from my dad. At first I thought maybe he was giving me space. Then I started to wonder if he'd decided it was easier to let me drift away than actually confront the problem. That thought hurt more than anything else. Every day I checked my phone, half hoping and half dreading to see his name pop up. When it didn't, it felt like confirmation of my worst fear. That silence sat heavy in my chest, reminding me that even after everything I'd said, nothing might actually change. Then Gloria called. Her name on my phone surprised me. She asked if we could meet for coffee. Her voice sounded careful, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I agreed, not knowing what to expect. When we met, she apologized. She told me my dad had finally explained everything to her, and she was horrified by what she learned. She said she hadn't realized how much her daughter had removed from the house. She admitted she should have noticed sooner. When I told her I'd taken the photos back and couldn't trust them to stay in the house, she nodded and said she understood. That honesty surprised me. After we parted ways, I went home and opened the boxes of photos I'd rescued from the garage. I spread them out across my bedroom floor and really looked at them for the first time. My childhood, my mom, my dad, years of memories that someone decided didn't deserve space anymore. Sitting there surrounded by them, an idea started forming in my mind, not out of anger but out of clarity. If my dad couldn't see what was missing anymore, maybe he needed to see it all at once. That was the moment I decided I wouldn't beg to be remembered. I would remind him. Clearly, publicly, and in a way that couldn't be ignored. After my meeting with Gloria, I couldn't stop thinking about the photos. They were still spread out on my bedroom floor days later, leaning against the wall, stacked on my desk, filling corners of the room like quiet witnesses. Every time I walked past them, I felt the weight of what almost disappeared. These weren't just pictures. They were proof that my life with my dad and my mom had existed long before anyone else entered the house. I realized then that if those memories could be erased so easily once, they could be erased again unless something changed permanently. The idea of the album stopped feeling optional and started feeling necessary. I called Evangeline that night and told her what I was thinking. She didn't hesitate. She said it was the right move. Not to shame anyone, not to start a fight, but to tell the truth in a way that couldn't be dismissed or quietly undone. We spent the next weekend at my apartment with photos spread across the living room floor, sorting them by year. Childhood birthdays, school years, family trips, holidays. My mom's smile appearing again and again, before illness touched her, before life became complicated. The more we sorted, the clearer the story became. This wasn't about one person being left out. This was an entire history being pushed aside. We decided the album needed to be done professionally. If I was going to do this, it had to look intentional, thoughtful, and permanent, not emotional or rushed. We chose a thick leather-bound album with gold corners, something that felt heavy in your hands, something that looked like it belonged on a shelf for generations. We wrote captions carefully, not dramatic, not accusatory, just facts, dates, moments, context. Each page told part of the story that had once lived on my dad's walls. As the album came together, something unexpected happened. I felt calmer. Organizing the photos felt like taking control of something I'd been powerless over for months. Every picture I placed was a refusal to be erased. Every caption was a quiet statement that I belonged. This wasn't about getting revenge on Waverly. It was about giving my dad the chance to see what he'd allowed to disappear. During those weeks, my dad called twice. The first time, he asked if I was coming to dinner. I told him I was busy with work. The second time, he asked if everything was okay. I said it was fine and kept the conversation short. I didn't tell him about the album. I needed him to experience it in the moment, without defenses, without time to prepare excuses. A few days later, Waverly texted me. The message was short and stiff, clearly forced. She said her mom told her to apologize, and that she was sorry if I felt hurt by what she did. The wording made it obvious she still didn't think she'd done anything wrong. There was no accountability, just discomfort at being confronted. I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. Some apologies aren't worth engaging with. 3 weeks before the party, Gloria texted to ask if I was coming to my dad's 60th birthday celebration. I stared at the message for a long time before replying yes. She asked if I wanted to bring anyone. I told her Evangeline would come with me. She sent back a smiley face and said she was glad I'd be there. That confirmation made everything feel real. There was no turning back now. The finished album arrived 1 week before the party. When I opened it, my breath caught. The photos were crisp and perfectly arranged. The story flowed naturally from page to page. My mom was present throughout, not hidden, not separated, but woven into the family narrative exactly where she belonged. It looked like something you'd treasure, not something you'd tuck away. That mattered. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the album open in front of me, thinking about what to write on the first page. I didn't want anger there. I didn't want accusation. After several drafts, I settled on something simple and true. A message about celebrating the family we'd been, and the memories we built together. I wrapped the album carefully, and placed it where I wouldn't forget it. The days leading up to the party were harder than I expected. Doubt crept in late at night. I wondered if people would think I was being dramatic. I worried they'd say I should have handled it privately. But every time I questioned myself, I remembered Waverly shrugging when I asked about my mom's photos. I remembered my dad's relief when I took the boxes away so he wouldn't have to deal with the conflict. I reminded myself that private conversations hadn't changed anything. The morning of the party, I stood in front of my closet for a long time deciding what to wear. I chose a blue dress my mom had always loved. It felt right. Not symbolic in a loud way, just quietly grounding. Evangeline picked me up, gave me a pep talk in the car, and reminded me that standing up for myself with dignity wasn't the same as creating drama. When we pulled up to my dad's house, balloons were tied to the porch and cars lined the street. The house was full. Gloria greeted me warmly and hugged me longer than I expected. Inside, relatives I hadn't seen in months smiled and asked how I'd been. My dad spotted me across the room and his face lit up in a way that made my chest ache. He hugged me tightly and whispered that he was really glad I came. For the first hour, I blended into the crowd. I talked. I laughed. I ate cake. I watched Waverly avoid eye contact from across the room. I noticed the walls still displayed her photos where mine used to be. I held the album close and waited. When it was finally time for gifts, I waited until the end. I stepped forward and handed my dad the wrapped album. He smiled, curious, and began unwrapping it slowly. The room quieted as he opened the cover. I watched his face change as he read the inscription, then turn the first page, and then another, and another. His hands started to shake. The room was completely silent now. I knew in that moment that everything was about to change. For a long moment after my dad opened the album, nobody spoke. The kind of silence that settled over the room wasn't awkward or uncomfortable. It was heavy. People leaned in without realizing they were doing it, drawn by something they hadn't expected to see. My dad sat frozen in his chair, the album resting on his knees, his fingers gripping the edges like he was afraid it might disappear if he let go. He stared at the pages, his eyes moving slowly from one photo to the next, and I could see recognition hit him in waves. Not confusion. Recognition. This wasn't new information, this was memory returning all at once. He turned another page, and then another. I watched his face tighten, the way it used to when he was trying not to cry in front of me when I was a kid. But this time, he didn't hide it. Tears slid down his cheeks and dropped onto the page, leaving small dark marks on the paper. He didn't wipe them away. He just kept turning pages, breathing unevenly, like he was finally seeing something he'd been avoiding for a long time. Around him, family members stood silently, reading over his shoulder, realizing what those walls had once held. Someone whispered my name softly. Someone else said, "I remember that picture." Another voice said, "Where did these all go?" I stayed where I was. I didn't explain. I didn't point. I didn't accuse. The album was doing exactly what I needed it to do, telling the story without my voice shaking. My dad finally closed the album carefully, like it was fragile. He rested his hand on the cover and looked up at me. His eyes were red and swollen, his face older somehow, stripped of excuses. When he spoke, his voice broke immediately. He said he hadn't realized how much was missing until he saw it all together. He said he didn't understand how he let something so important slip away piece by piece. Then he stood up and crossed the room in a few steps and pulled me into a hug that was too tight and too long and desperately overdue. He kept saying he was sorry. Not once, not casually, over and over again, like he was trying to make up for every time he'd stayed quiet before. Then he did something I didn't expect. He turned back to the room. He held up the album and told everyone that this was the most meaningful gift he'd ever received. He said it out loud, clearly, without hesitation. He said he was ashamed that these memories had been put away. He admitted that avoiding conflict had cost him something precious. When he said that last part, his eyes moved, just briefly, toward Waverly. The room followed his gaze. Waverly stood against the wall, arms crossed tight over her chest, her face flushed. She didn't look angry. She looked exposed. For the first time since I'd known her, she had nowhere to hide. No excuses. No deniability. This wasn't my word against hers anymore. The evidence was in my dad's hands, and everyone could see it. Gloria stepped forward quietly and placed her hand on my dad's shoulder. As she looked through the album, I watched the realization settle over her face. Shock first, then guilt, then something harder, resolve. She turned to Waverly and said they would talk later. Her voice wasn't gentle this time. It wasn't cruel either. It was firm, final, and unmistakable. No one defended Waverly. No one minimized what happened. No one told me I was being dramatic. That alone felt like a victory. The party slowly resumed, but the energy had shifted. People gathered around my dad, flipping through the album, sharing memories, laughing softly, pointing at photos they remembered seeing on the walls years ago. The house felt fuller somehow, like something had been restored even before a single frame was rehung. My uncle pulled me aside and told me I did the right thing. My aunt admitted she'd noticed the photos disappearing, but didn't know how to bring it up. Dad's longtime friend told me the house hadn't felt right lately, and now he understood why. Near the end of the night, my dad asked if he could keep the album close. He said he didn't want it out of his sight. I told him I'd made duplicate prints of every photo. I'd planned ahead. When I brought in the box from my car, Gloria immediately said they should all go back up where they belonged. She offered to help hang them. Waverly didn't argue. She didn't say anything at all. Before I left, my dad asked to talk privately. We stood in his office with the door closed, the noise of the party muffled behind us. He apologized again. This time without excuses. He admitted he'd chosen silence because it was easier than confrontation. He admitted he knew something was wrong but convinced himself it would resolve on its own. He told me watching me be erased should never have been an option. He asked if I could forgive him. I told him I forgave him. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant moving forward with boundaries. He agreed. He promised real change, not comfort-driven decisions. When we hugged goodbye, it felt different, lighter, honest. The next morning, he sent me a photo of the hallway. 3 of my childhood pictures were already back up. Over the next few days, more followed. The mantle, the bookshelf, even new frames with recent photos of us together, not just restoring the past, acknowledging the present. Things didn't magically become perfect after that. Waverly and I weren't close. Probably never would be. But the erasing stopped. The photos stayed. And my dad started showing up, really showing up, in ways he hadn't before. What I learned from all of this wasn't how to win. It was how to exist without apologizing. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I told the truth, and let it stand where it belonged. And for the first time in a long time, I drove home knowing I hadn't disappeared quietly.